Okay, I think since it's a couple minutes after 2, we will get started. A few more folks might join in, but for those of you who are here, thank you all for coming. My name is Kimberly Gerling. I am the Research and Policy Director at Evidence for Democracy here in Ottawa. So for those of you who are not familiar with E4D, we are a nonprofit that's based here in Ottawa. We work on advocating for evidence-based decision-making in government, and we are one of the co-organizers of the Vote Science campaign. So I'm super excited to talk to you about the campaign today. I'm happy to answer any questions. So the way that this is going to go is I'm going to give a short presentation on the campaign and some of the tools that are available through the campaign. We have a French person on the call. We have Marie from the Science and Policy Exchange. They're also one of the co-organizers of the campaign with us. So Marie will be on the call as well, and she can speak to any French questions that you might have as well. And all of the tools that I'm talking about are available on in French as well on the website if that's of interest to you. So without further ado, I think we will get started. So as I'm sure you are well aware, we are just a couple of weeks away from a federal election on October 21st. And although science and research are super, super important to a whole bunch of aspects of our lives, our health, our economy, our environment, all sorts of amazing things, science and research are super, super important. However, science and research are very rarely made key issues during an election. And because we here at Evidence for Democracy work to make sure that science and evidence are a part of decision-making in federal government, we think that this needs to change. And so we, along with a whole bunch of other organizations, have started a campaign called Vote Science. So this campaign started with a conversation between Evidence for Democracy and some of our colleagues in Toronto and Montreal, Toronto Science Policy Network, Science Policy Exchange, and the Canadian Society for Molecular Biosciences. So in the lead up to the election, we thought, it's really important that we make sure that federal candidates are aware that science and research are important to voters. And so we decided that we would put together a campaign to help scientists and science supporters make science and research a key election issue. And since then, we have gotten a whole bunch of other organizations who work on science and research across Canada to sign on to the campaign. Here are all of them in the slide here. So we're super excited to see such big support. And it's been really, really great to have these organizations on board as well. Also, if you know of any other organizations who are interested in signing on to the campaign, let us know, because they are always welcome to do so. So what is Vote Science? So the idea of Vote Science is that we've created a single portal for scientists and supporters of science to access tools, resources, to help them empower themselves to engage in the federal election. So this includes tools to engage directly with candidates, to find your candidates, information on science and policy issues that are potentially important to discuss with your candidates during the campaign. And we're really encouraging candidates to commit to platforms to make science and research a priority. So instead of all of us doing this individually as organizations, this whole coalition is bringing together science and research organizations across Canada to do this in a more cohesive, collaborative way. So what I'm going to do today in this short webinar is just sort of walk you through votescience.ca and show you some of the tools that you can find on the website, talk to you a little bit about how you can use Vote Science to engage more directly with your candidates and with the election in general. So one of the things that you can do on Vote Science is to use an email template to connect directly with your candidates. So if you go to votescience.ca, you can actually go and enter your name and your email and your postal code. And you can actually pull up a really easy to use template that identifies the candidates from all different parties in your riding. And instead of you having to actually go into your own email and craft an email, we've put together a really easy to use email that identifies some of the key science issues that we, as sort of experts in the science policy arena, have identified as pretty important in this election. So you can use that template to send an email to your candidates. You can ask them how they will personally support science and research if they're elected, and get them to give you some feedback on what science and research issues are important to them. So you can also edit that email template as well if you want to identify science and research issues that are important to you as well. So that can all be done directly from the website. We already had almost 600 people use that email template, so we're really excited to see that that has been a tool that people are enjoying. If you want to also send a more hard copy, we have, you can see here, this is an example. We have postcards that we've put together that have some already pre-filled information on why science research is important, asking your candidates to champion evidence-based decision-making and support policies that are investing in science. So you can download these postcards right from the website if you want to print them at home. If you're based in Ottawa or Toronto and Montreal, the organizations that I mentioned before have some of them available in their offices, or we're happy to send you postcards if you want some for yourself or for an organization that you want to organize a postcard writing party or something like that. We're happy to send those along to you. So I'll put my information at the end of this webinar as well, if that's something that interests you as well. Another thing that we've been doing through Vote Science is sharing selfies to show why you personally are going to vote science. So, oops, sorry. 1 second. Oh no. I'm going, oh no. Technical difficulties, just a minute. Here we go. 1 second. Find my screen sharing again. There we go. Sorry about that. Here we go. Great. So, so one of the things we want to do with the campaign is to show candidates why science is important to us as individuals. So part of the reason we wanted to do this as a collaborative campaign is because science and research is so broad and it is so important to so many different aspects of our lives. So with these science selfies, you can actually download our template, which is just a simple sort of piece of paper that says, I vote science because. And you can post on your own social media the reasons why voting science is important to you. So you can see here, lots and lots of people across Canada have already utilized this template and have shared their reasons for science. So some of these people have said, you know, they're voting science because they're concerned about the climate. For me, I am really involved in drug policy and harm reduction, and so responding to the opioid overdose requires good science. Some people are just really passionate to make sure that their governments are using strong evidence in decision making and want to make sure that they're voting in candidates who are going to champion evidence-based decision making and have policies in place to do that. So if you want to use the template, we really encourage you to download it and put it up on your website, on your social media. Another thing that we are doing that you can access on the website is to download our toolkit, which is about engaging with your federal candidates. So we put together the toolkit. You can see this is just an example of what it looks like, that has a whole bunch of different ways that you individually can actually engage with your candidates. And the toolkit has a whole bunch of different ideas, ranging from very, very simple to more sort of complex and involved ideas. So for example, we can give you tips on how you can find information on your individual candidates if you're wanting to reach out. So where do you find their websites? How do you find their emails? How can you set up a meeting with your candidates? And how do you actually plan for that meeting? What is that meeting going to look like? We have some ideas for holding events like pub nights or debates with your candidates and some ideas on how that might run. We also have some good resources for responding to door knockers or even just talking to your candidate's event, as well as some tips on what your candidates might need and want out of those meetings. So I know personally for me, before I got involved in this community, the idea of engaging directly with my candidates was something that I found kind of scary. And so especially for scientists or science supporters who may never have done this before, the toolkit is a really good tool for learning how to do this, especially when it's your first time. So like I mentioned, one of the ways that we can help you prepare for those kinds of engagements is just a very simple tool, which is responding to door knockers. So I'm sure that some of you have already had this happen in this campaign. Political candidates will often come by themselves or send campaign volunteers door to door to actually talk to voters, to find out what matters to voters and to sort of share some of their plans for their campaigns. And this can be really surprising. I know just the other day I was preparing dinner at home and my candidate came to my door, and if you're not prepared, you can sort of flounder a little bit and not ask the questions that you have, or not even be sure what to ask. So what we've done is we've put together a little postcard. You can actually download it from the site, or again, we have hard copies if you want us to provide those for you. That is a little postcard that has some pre-prepared questions for your federal candidates. So these are based on some of the sort of current science policy issues that we've identified here at E4D. You can also download a more detailed document that outlines some of these details with more background. But what we recommend is sort of putting these little postcards at your door so you're prepared if your candidates come to your doors with some really great questions on evidence-informed decision-making, on science funding, and transparency and openness when it comes to science and research. Let's say that you do have a really successful meeting with one of your candidates, even if that's just an email exchange. One of the things that we're also trying to do through the Vote Science campaign is keep track of those interactions. So on the website, you can actually find this Google form. And let's say that you had an email that came back from one of your candidates and they've really identified that they're a supporter of science and they have a really good plan for what they're going to do should they be elected. We really encourage you to fill that out on this document. So what we're going to do internally with this document is just keep track of potential champions for science. In the new government, it's always good to know if there are some folks coming on board who are really good champions for evidence and research in science. And it's just a really good way to see how the campaign is going. So we really encourage you to use that document. Something else that we've seen coming out of the campaign so far, which has been really encouraging, is we have seen a number of candidates who have responded to emails or who have reached out to us directly as the Vote Science team, asking how they can support the campaign, how they can find people in their communities who are excited about science and research. Maybe you are a candidate who's listening in on the webinar or know a candidate who has asked these questions. So we recently added to the website a new toolkit for federal candidates. And in this toolkit are tools on tips for candidates on how they can find people in their communities, events that are happening that they might want to attend, or in ways that they can connect up with their local communities and show their support for science. So if this is not enough for you and you're really burning with passion for you want to be more actively engaged in the campaign, we can also help you with that. So we have some resources on the Vote Science website to help you do this, but we recommend that we can sort of support you in writing an op-ed, we can help you organize an event or launch an initiative in your own communities. So here I've highlighted sort of 2 examples of how this has already happened. So on the left here, this is a University Affairs article that was written with our Vote Science team, mostly by Farah, who highlighted how the Vote Science campaign is going, what is it actually doing, what are we trying to achieve. It was published just last week in University Affairs. And then on the right here is an event that happened in Toronto just a couple of weeks ago, sort of highlighting the Vote Science campaign. It was a panel discussion with Amanda Beery and Imogen Coe and David Naylor here, which was a pretty well attended, good event to discuss the campaign as well. So there's lots and lots of room for new ideas. These are just 2 ideas of how you can participate in the campaign, but we are always open to hearing your ideas as well. If there's something that you're really passionate about, we can help you do that. So that's kind of the bulk of the website itself and all the tools that we have available, but there also are a lot of things coming up in the next few weeks lead up to the election. So if you have more questions about the campaign, we are doing a Canadian side chat with 2 of the organizers of the Vote Science campaign. So this is on Twitter. It's an hour-long, it's a live Twitter chat using the hashtag Canadian side chat that's here. So that's September 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to sort of have more of a live Q&A, we encourage you to tune in and share this around to your colleagues and friends who might want to ask questions, especially if they weren't able to attend the webinar today and they want to ask more sort of direct questions on the campaign. We also here at E4D just distributed a science policy questionnaire to the party leaders yesterday. So what we're doing with this is we've put together a set of questions to each of, it's the same questions to each of the political parties, asking them what their platform plans are on a number of topics relating to science, research, and evidence. So I've given them a deadline until October 9th, and what I'm going to be doing with that questionnaire is summarizing the results that we hear from each of the parties and publishing them publicly to sort of show voters before the election what each of the parties is planning to do in their platform on science research specifically. So stay tuned, that will be coming out hopefully by the end of the week of October 11th. In line with that, we are having a week of action on October the 5th to the 11th. So that's starting fairly soon. And what we're trying to do is really just sort of drum up some last push efforts to get people excited and engaged on the Vote Science campaign. So this will include some coordinated letter to the editor writing across Canada, We've gotten a lot of our volunteers across Canada to start planning events within this week to sort of engage their candidates, to talk about the Vote Science campaign. If this is something that you are personally interested in, please let me know. I'd be happy to help you think of some cool ideas. So that could be, postcard writing sessions. One of the things we've been talking about is trying to get postcards sent to all candidates across Canada. So we'd be happy to sort of help you coordinate with that, or maybe some pub nights with your local candidates, some great ideas. The Toronto Science Policy Network is having an event as a part of the Week of Action already. So if you're in Toronto, that's going to be happening on October 10th at 5 p.m. at the Donnelly Centre. It's a Vote Science workshop, which will be led by Amanda Very, who's a scientist who has done a lot of advocacy in her work. Great. And yeah, so just follow along on the website as well. We're going to be updating the website regularly for updates on events in your community. You can share your selfies and any other new information. So I see already that there's a bunch of questions, which is so awesome. So I'm going to just open up the question box here. And if you have a question and you haven't asked it already, I encourage you, there is a Q&A tool here on Zoom, or a chat box, which you can also use as well, which I don't know if I can see it. Amazing, great. Okay. So, oh yeah, so for the record, before we get started on the Q&A, so I'm here, this is Kim from E4D. Emma is also here from E4D. She is our engagement and communications coordinator. She also works a lot with our volunteers, so she's also available to answer questions. And then Marie from the Science Policy Exchange is here. Should we have French questions, or if Marie wants to chime in as well, SPE has been a really great supporter on the campaign as well. So I think I'll maybe just start from the top with the chat. Is that okay with everybody? Great. One second, I lost my cursor. Here we go. Okay. So great. I think I'm going to answer this question about the candidates not showing up on the website. Is that a good place to start, Emma? Okay, so Julie asked a question and said that she tried to send an email to her candidates and noticed that some of the candidates don't show up for her tool. So I know that Emma already responded to her, but this is something that we've actually noticed a couple of times, so it's not perfect. One of the interesting things about elections is that candidates are getting added and changed as the election goes on sometimes, and we're using a tool that sometimes isn't fully perfect. So if you notice that your candidates aren't coming up for particular parties, please just let us know. We're hoping that those errors are happening less and less. I know that it was happening a lot more before, but if you do notice that, please just let us know, and we'll do our best to try and correct it. But we really appreciate you letting us know that. Somebody asked a question about the science policy questionnaire. So yes, the Ariel asked the question, will the results for the science policy questionnaire be posted on the same website? Yes. So after I get all of the results from the questionnaire, I will be posting that on the Vote Science website. I'll be distributing it via our Evidence for Democracy channels as well, and I'll be sharing the results to all of our Vote Science community, who I imagine will probably also share it via their channels. So there'll be lots of places that the questionnaire results will be shared. If you're interested and you can't find it, just please send me an email and I'm happy to pass it on to you as well. Let's see. Oh, sorry, that's right. I had an error on the Twitter slide. Sorry about that. So I'm noticing too, yeah, there was an error on the last slide. The Twitter chat is, sorry, not today. It is October 1st at 12 p.m. I'll make sure that that gets corrected in the final version as well. Okay, so I think that's all the chat questions. Do we have any additional questions right now? I see someone raise their hand. Emma, can you answer this? Oh, here, hold on. Let me just see if I can answer a hand up. Just a moment. So I'm seeing a question, but I don't really know how to answer this one. So I think maybe we will, just a minute. Oh. Okay, there we go. So I think we're going to move on to some questions here. Maybe, Emma, can you read out a question?
Yeah, so one question we have that's come in is, what are the risks of science advocacy for science or professionally? So that's a question we get a lot, so we'll definitely address that.
Yeah, so part of what we wanted to achieve with this campaign is sort of debunking the fact that scientists and science supporters can't engage directly with political candidates or directly in political activities, which is totally not true. And I think, I mean, I feel like I used to feel this way as well. I'm a scientist by training. I worked in the government for a number of years, and especially when I was a public servant or, serving at a university, I was really nervous about engaging directly in political activities because I was worried that it was going to make me look nonpartisan or that I was going to sort of risk my job. But I really want to stress that that is not true. So even if you're working as a public servant, I know there's probably some folks who are on this call today who are public servants working in Ottawa. I double checked as well. You can actually engage in political activities, even up to volunteering on a campaign as a public servant, as long as it doesn't impact your ability to do your job in a nonpartisan way. Especially if you are just doing something like sending an email out to all of your candidates about an issue that's important to you. You can have debates with your candidates, all of your candidates, to ask questions to them. Those are certainly totally nonpartisan activities and just really effective ways of gathering information for you. So I would really strongly encourage you to not be scared of being actively involved in these kinds of, I guess, sort of political activities, because you can definitely do them while maintaining your totally nonpartisan approach without risking your job at all. And if you want more tips on that, I'm happy to help you out with that.
Okay, so we have another good question has just come in from Julie. So question is, the Green Party is the only one who has included implementation of the Naylor report in their platform. Is this something we should be directly asking to the other parties as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm not sure if you've checked out on the website. So we did ask about, or like in our sort of document that we put together of science policy platform issues that we wanted to highlight, full implementation of the Naylor report. So those of you who are not familiar with the Naylor report, a few years ago, the government put together a big sort of study and then put forward a report and recommendations on how to support fundamental science and research in Canada. And it's been sort of a roadmap for how to support science. And there are still a few outstanding recommendations on that report. So I would say I would hope so. I mean, it's really nice to see that they put that into their platform, and I'm hoping that maybe that's a good fodder for other parties to respond and think about that in their own platforms. So yeah, I would say that if that's something that's important to you, like to push for that. The fundamental science review was a really well researched, really evidenced approach to how to better support science in Canada. And so I do think that we still should be pushing for full Naylor recommendations implementation.
Okay, awesome. So now we did have a French question come in. So Marie is gonna jump in here and take that question. So over to you, Marie. Just remember to unmute.
Hello, merci. Donc la question qui est la question en français, avez-vous une liste des erreurs que le gouvernement conservateur précédent a fait? Par exemple, museler les scientifiques fédéraux, fermer le bureau du conseiller scientifique principal, couper la recherche et environnement, etc. Est-ce que nous voulons assurer que personne ne refera, puisque cela serait sans doute utile? Je pense que pour répondre à cette question, je vais revenir au rapport Naylor. C'est un rapport qui est vraiment a pour but de montrer qu'est-ce qui a été un peu déficient dans les dernières années, qu'est-ce qu'il faut changer pour revenir au niveau des autres pays du G7, mais aussi plus au niveau de la productivité scientifique. Donc vraiment, les objectifs du rapport Naylor, c'est pas seulement de faire une liste des choses qui ont été mal, mais plutôt de faire une liste des choses qui devraient être améliorées. Et deuxièmement, il me semble que sur notre site, dans les recommandations, on a aussi l'une des recommandations qui est dit augmenter les niveaux de fonds fédéraux pour la recherche pour revenir au niveau des fonds qui ont été investis dans la recherche en 2011. Donc, ça fait partie des choses. On n'a pas vraiment une liste disant tout ce qui a été fait de façon négative, mais plutôt de dire, afin de revenir à la productivité qu'on avait avant, on peut passer par le rapport Naylor et quelques recommandations qu'on a sur le site. Si ça répond à la question.
Thank you, Marie. That's awesome. So I think there's another question in the chat. Emma, do you maybe want to read it out?
Sure. So the next question is, do you have any tips on creating an open conversation space? I know some members of my in-laws have very different views, but have a very aggressive demeanor.
That's a good question and a hard question. So, I mean, there's no perfect answer to this question. And I would say in my experience, so we have been doing a couple of websites or webinars on misinformation and how to respond to misinformation. And so this is something that comes up a lot. So let's say, for example, that someone in your community shares misinformation or has a very different view than you. And some of the tips that we have been sort of pushing forward in those webinar conversations about misinformation is, first of all, to approach those kinds of conversations with sensitivity. So sometimes it can be really tempting to start those conversations sort of feeling like, well, I know that I'm right, and telling that person that they're wrong. And that can often be the first point at which those conversations shut down. And so I would recommend sort of starting the conversation and saying like, hey, look, I know that you have this point of view on, this topic. I totally understand how you might have that point of view, or, where you're coming from, sort of reasoning with that person and making them feel like their point of view is not dumb or unfounded. And then sort of starting a conversation and trying to find ways to reason with them. So I think that part of the reason that those conversations can get really aggressive is that people feel defensive and they feel like they're being attacked for their sort of deep-seated feelings and beliefs. So I think just starting the conversation by saying like, hey, this is something that I feel really passionately about. It's something that I know that you feel really passionately about. And I recognize that you think this, which is a totally like understandable way to feel, is a really good way of doing it. Also, not calling people out publicly. So you could say, for example, you might see your great uncle posting via social media their support for a policy that you think is really problematic. Rather than sort of responding to that publicly in a big public domain, I would recommend sort of maybe having a coffee date or sitting down in a really safe space that gives them a chance to sort of talk out their feelings. So, I mean, there's no perfect approach. It can be really difficult. But I mean, those are maybe some starting points.
Okay, so another question we have is, how can I best hold my representative accountable? They might say they try to implement evidence-based policies, but how can I be sure it's something they're pushing for, especially at the federal level?
Yeah, so that's a really good question as well. So part of what we're trying to do with the campaign is to not only give you the tools to engage with your candidates during the lead up to the election, but building good relationships with those candidates should they actually be elected. And so one of the things that I would recommend doing, so let's say that you do find a candidate who is really supportive of science research in their platform, that is giving you really great ideas of what they want to do with science and research, and then you end up successfully voting them in as an MP. One of the things that I would recommend doing is maintaining that relationship. One of the benefits of this leadership election is you have a really good exposure to those candidates right now, and they're willing to listen and they're willing to engage with you. And so if you feel that after that candidate gets elected, that party or that candidate isn't actually following through with what they said they were going to do, talk to them about it. right now, that I'm totally going to put in a plug for what we're doing right now. One of the things that E4D is doing right now is a study looking at how members of parliament use information. And what we heard from a lot of members of parliament was they want more scientists and science supporters to talk to them about things that matter to them. They want to build those relationships. So not just with MPs, but with their staff as well. So I would say, like, engage with your MPs after the election has happened. So this Vote Science campaign is definitely about the lead up to the election, but it doesn't end at that point. There's lots and lots of ways that you can engage with your MPs, even if you're not living in Ottawa. Visit their constituency offices, make friends with the staff members, bring those concerns forward. That's what their job is as MPs. They need to listen and respond to their constituents. So I would say just like keep on it, build those relationships. Those relationships mean a lot.
Great. We have another question that follows pretty well following that. So next up is, what are some of the methods people can take to evaluate whether a candidate is pro-science?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of what we're trying to do with the campaign too is to show you some of the science policy issues that are on the table right now. So if you really don't know, what you should be paying attention to, maybe you're new to this field, you might not work in a science space, but you know that evidence and science is important to you. I would go check out on our website, on the Vote Science website, there's a really good 2-page document of sort of some of the current science policy issues that we're pushing for that we want to see from our candidates. We've sort of split them into 3 categories. The first being evidence-based decision-making. So topics like, do they have a way of like integrating science advice into government decision-making? Do they have a way of being accountable and making sure that evidence is being used in government decision-making? And then support for science and research. So things like, do they have plans for how they're going to fund science and research in Canada? Do they have plans for how to support trainees and the next generation of sort of scientists and science professionals in Canada? And then the third section is about openness and transparency. So one of the things we think is important is not just using evidence in science, but also being transparent about those kinds of decisions and the kinds of evidence and science that's used in decisions. So do they have plans for making sure that government science is open publicly, or that scientists can speak to the government or speak to the public to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where scientists are being muzzled again? So those are some of the sort of key issues that we've alerted. I would also sort of look into, I know some of the parties have started to release their platforms. You can check into those party platforms. Usually they'll have a section on things like science and innovation, looking at topics like climate to see if they have sort of science and research and evidence integrated into that. Those are some of the sort of starting points that might alert you to where a candidate feels. And then again, like I mentioned before, we did put forward the questionnaire on science and research, and that will be a really good tool where we will put together what the parties themselves have identified as their science and research focuses and what policies they will put into place if they're elected. So those are some of the tips that I would recommend.
Okay, so I think we have just one more question. So remember, everyone, just throw your questions in the chat if you have them, or in the Q&A box. So next question is, how can scientists and universities do a better job of articulating their value to society?
Yeah, that's tricky sometimes, for sure. Like I mentioned before, we here at E4D work a lot on this issue and trying to help scientists learn how to better communicate their work to decision makers. This is something that will be in the report that I'm putting out in November after our MP study. So there's a couple of ways. The first is that one of the challenges that we hear from decision makers is that scientists will often put forward their science in the way that other scientists are used to accessing that science. So, they'll publish in a peer-reviewed journal or in a sort of science forum and think, well, I've done my job. It's out there. The discussion section talks about the policy relevancy of that science, and they've done my job. But the reality is that a lot of sort of governments and decision makers don't actually have access to those kinds of publications. They don't know where to look. And even if they do find them, it's written in a way that they don't know how to really access. So I would say, think about how to frame your science in a way that's very, very relevant to decision makers. So part of that means that you, if this is something that interests you, think about, learning more about what's going on in the government landscape. If there's a particular issue that's coming up in discussions in the House, let's say, for example, your thing is environment. and there's a big bill that's being voted on in the environment, that might be a really good time for you to put that forward. It's about also finding, so timing is one of them, being aware of issues that are relevant to decision makers is one of them, framing your science in a way that's relevant to decision makers and timed really well. And then also, oh, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so I would say just sort of, oh yeah, that's right. Also being aware of how government policies work. So something that we have available, if it's of interest to you, are a couple of toolkits on how to actually communicate to your decision makers. And things like, how do you actually involve yourself in the budget decision-making process, for example. So there's lots of different ways that you can be more effective in actually accessing your decision maker and framing your science in a way that's going to make that accessible to them by just sort of being aware of how policies are made, how decision makers think, the types of information that they need, and those kinds of factors as well. I would say that those are some of the big ones. So I think that's it in terms of questions. So I think for now we're going to wrap up. I think that it's still on my screen, but I'll just make sure. So if you are interested in asking me questions or asking the Vote Science team questions, you can contact us either at info@evidencefordemocracy.ca or me directly at Kimberly@evidencefordemocracy.ca. You can check out the Vote Science website, votescience.ca. We also are on, Evidence for Democracy is on Twitter and Instagram as well. You can reach out to us there. Otherwise, yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Please let me know if you have any ideas on how you personally would like to engage in the campaign if you didn't feel like they were answered here. Otherwise, I look forward to chatting with you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in.